Now, just a few days ago, in fact, on the 2nd of December, he assumed a new role as the new administrator of the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, bringing his vast experience of national leadership, experience in international aid and finance to a United Nations agency that operates in about 170 countries and territories across the world with the aim of eradicating poverty and reducing inequality. Please join me in welcoming the new UNDP Administrator Alexander de Croo and Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor James Bays.
Take your seats, we're about to begin. Our newsmaker is very familiar, as Hida says, a long-standing European leader, but in a brand new job, and only 6 days in the job. So I can't really ask you about much of what you've done and quiz you on your record, because it's pretty short, but we will focus on what you are going to do at UNDP. Your job, the head of the UNDP is called the administrator. So, Administrator de Croo, first perhaps outline what you see as the mission of UNDP in this turbulent world. For anyone who doesn't quite get it, what does UNDP do and what does it need to do in the world we're now living in?
Yeah, excellent question to start off. And first of all, thank you for inviting me here. Well, if you look in the UN system, there's 3 big pillars. One of them is peace and security. The second one is humanitarian work, and the third one is development. UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, is really the backbone, the engine of the development part. Now, in DP, Development Program, I think the P is really the important element. First of all, you could see P as program. What UNDP is doing is systemic change. So it's not that we do just one specific project, we try to do things that involve multiple things. Let's say, for example, a country wants to raise financing through what is called domestic resource mobilization, which basically means taxation. Well, if you are looking for new forms of taxation, let's say, for example, a taxation on property, well, a country actually needs a registry to know who's owning what. And then you need a taxation system to basically collect that money, and then you need a system to look into fraud. That type of introduction of those programs, this is typically what we like to do. So that's the programmatic part of it. You could also, the P could also be an element of partnership. This is typically how we work. I mean, we sit next to national governments and we work together with them. You could say that very often we are the co-pilot of the development work. And the third way of looking into the P is platform. We are a platform for development. Very often we work together with other agencies within the UN or outside the UN. That is because we have a very extensive local presence. Out of the 23,000 people that work for us, almost 90% are in our partner countries. We are active in 170 countries, and very often we stay there. I mean, we have longevity, and the trust that our partners have in us is really one of our major assets.
In the past, you've done jobs that have prepared you for this, but as you take a big UN job, a change of direction from leading a European government, what sort of preparation do you do before you arrive in New York to get yourself ready for this? And what have you done in these first 5 days? Because I think it probably gives us an indication of your priorities. If you tell us what you decided was the thing to do on day one.
Well, it has been a bit drinking from the fire hose. I mean, there's a lot coming at you at an organization which is really an operational organization. I mean, we day to day we work throughout the world. First element is to listen, and really my ambition is in in the first months, try to meet as many people as possible, understand what is going well, what are the concerns that we have. That's the first thing. Second element is to continue on our delivery. And just to give you a few examples of what we are doing today, we have a quite big operation in Ukraine. This is our third biggest office that we have. What do we do in Ukraine? Well, we try to start with rebuilding, for example, schools so that the kids can go to get their education. We try to reconstruct as much as possible. That's one example of our daily delivery. Second example is in Gaza, where we have started taking away the debris. There is no place on earth where there is more debris per capita, unfortunately, and really trying to prepare the reconstruction of Gaza. Of course, this is contingent to a peace conference, which we hope would take place soon. But these are things that show on which we are working on a daily basis and which I try to be involved as much as possible.
But how much of a central role should the UN have on Gaza? Because, as you know, at various points in the last couple of years, the UN's been completely cut out, including the humanitarian operation at one point cut out of Gaza. And the plan is very much a Trump plan, led by a board of peace rather than, although it's authorized by the UN Security Council, rather than the UN Security Council. How important is it that the UN gets a central role in this?
You know, the UN gets a central role when the member states want it. I mean, we are a member state organization. When member states see value added for us to be active, we are. When member states do not want us to be active, then we are not. But in the essence, we are at our best when we put multilateralism into practice, when we tackle things that one country cannot do on its own, when we are convening, when we are bringing very often people with very different opinions together. This is where we are at our strongest. Now, for me, as a former national politician, it is a bit coming back to my first love. I mean, I've been Minister of Development for 6 years. I've been Minister of Finance, I've been Prime Minister, but development is something which is close to my heart. And I think at a moment like now, where the idea of multilateralism, the idea that certain things you're probably better off in doing it together, is under pressure. I think if you know something about this topic, if you have something to bring to the table, I think you cannot stand on the sidelines. I think you need to be on the field, and this is the choice that I made. Maybe last element, I was Prime Minister in Belgium, which is notorious for being a country of coalitions and not always easy to navigate. I hope that is a background that will help me a bit in navigating the complexity of the United Nations.
Because you are arriving in New York at UN headquarters, what arguably is the worst crisis for the UN in its history, in its 80 years. These huge funding cuts across the UN system, 18.8% cuts in staff, 15% cut in the regular budget. Now, your budget is different. How is the UNDP going to be impacted by funding cuts? And I'm talking about the funding of UNDP's work and the funding for the countries that you work with.
So UNDP is today a $5 billion US organization, 23,000 people throughout the world. Our funding base is quite diverse. So we are impacted by the funding cuts, but less so than, for example, WFP or the humanitarian organizations. What does that mean in practice? Well, it means in practice that we are entering into a reform program of becoming more efficient, having less overlap with other organizations, being clearer on what our mandate really is, using technology to try to be more impactful towards the people that we try to work. Now, some people say, well, you will have to do more with less. Honestly speaking, I have a bit my doubts on that. I think that, unfortunately, we will do less with less. But my commitment is that we do it better, that we do it in higher quality, that we are more innovative, that we are better at leveraging private finance, that we better work together with the private sector. And really, for every dollar we receive, we have to get that dollar to work, to sweat as much as possible. And we have been doing that. We see that, for example, investment in SDG-related topics, for every dollar being invested, the return can go up to $60. That way, we have been able to mobilize more than $800 billion in money that is basically leveraged through the private sector. And basically combining private capital and bringing that to the needs in the world. And there is no lack of needs in the world, but there's also no lack of capital in the world. I mean, there is a lot of capital to be invested. There is a difficulty of allocation, and there is difficulty of reducing risk. That really is my new assignment, is to unlock that capital and bring it to the growing needs that you have throughout the world.
Some of your money, the core budget, comes from 41 countries. And as you say, perhaps you're not impacted as much as some other agencies, but many of those are cutting their development spending. Your deputy, when he was acting in your job, said our work will be threatened and eventually compromised. How worried are you about the cutting in that core funding? Because my understanding is that's the money that's not earmarked for specific projects, which gives you the flexibility in your work.
Exactly. So out of the 5 billion that we work with every year, approximately 10% is what is called core funding. Now, core funding is also known as unearmarked, which is money going to our core mandate of standing to the side of government and working together with them. That is under pressure, but that process has been going on for decades already. Look, in a broader sense, what is called ODA, or Official Development Assistance, over the past years, approximately 1/3 has disappeared. So yes, this will have an impact. But that means that public funding really needs to be used to those locations where it has the most impact and where it is the only way of financing. There's plenty of things where actually, thanks to technological evolution, thanks to market functioning, that used to be financed with public money that today actually are commercially viable. For example, many of the investments today in renewable energy is today commercially viable. And we should then use public money just to do the basic infrastructure, or create the legal framework, or create the banking system. But for example, today, photovoltaic cells are perfectly viable throughout the world. So where we allocate public money needs to be in those framework investments that then create an environment where private investment can take place. So yes, I see the impact on public funding, but that does not mean that other types of funding couldn't play their role.
And you think there are still other types of funding to chase? You talk about new partners in finance and the private sector, but I heard Achim Steiner talk about that. I heard Helen Clark talk about that. I interviewed both your predecessors. There's more money out there?
Well, there is, but we should not think about private investment in a naive way. I mean, the private sector will invest when there's a return, or where it can reduce its risks. And that's perfectly normal. I mean, I have absolutely no problem with the fact that private investment is looking for a certain level of profitability. And looking at financial flows throughout the world, I mean, public investment plays a role, but foreign direct investment actually has played a much more important role. Domestic resource mobilization, which is basically justified taxation, plays a very important role, and remittances, which is basically people who work in the Western world and send money back to their families. I mean, the volume of remittances is today already 3 times bigger than official development assistance. So let's look at it in a broad sense, and let's also not forget what we have achieved. I mean, if you look at the last decades, child mortality has halved. The level of scholarity has been multiplied with 3. HIV infections have decreased in a dramatic way. We have reduced extreme poverty with half over the past 20 years. So the development world can show results. What is important now is that we continue in that flow and that we continue to innovate and that we find other sources of financing. But the results are there. There's a lot of criticism to multilateralism. There's some criticism to the development world, and some of that criticism, we have to take it serious. We have to be more efficient. We have to be faster. We have to be more present at those locations where we make the difference. But let's also not shy away from the result that we have achieved and put those results at the table and say, look at what we are capable of. Investment in development is today the smartest investment that you can do. Even for donor countries, this is smart investment from a humanity point of view, but even if only self-interest is what you're looking for, I mean, from the perspective of creating more trade, from the perspective of better managing migration, from the perspective of countering illegal drug trade, investment in development is a smart thing to do. What should be my assignment is to make sure that in the worldwide debate of today, where that debate is being dominated by security issues, is being dominated by migration, by other topics. All those topics are legitimate discussions, but they're symptom discussions. They're symptoms of something underlying. And the thing underlying is very often extreme precarity, inequality, lack of opportunity. That's what development tries to tackle. And so development should be part of that worldwide debate. It's not the case today, but it's my assignment that when we are discussing extremism, migration, security, development is part of that discussion.
Because it's not normally, UNDP, a headline-grabbing part of the UN or seen as the most exciting part of the UN. I suppose you're going to try and change that. You work in 170 different countries and territories. UNDP sometimes to be described to me as the senior service of the UN because you provide an operational backbone for the UN system, for 70 different UN entities. Can you keep that footprint with your new budget?
Yes, you can, because that footprint is to the service of many others. So that footprint is very often used by other UN agencies. And we see that today there's often duplication on the local level. I mean, the UN needs to go in the direction of having a few organizations have a local footprint, but there are also a platform for others to use it. And I mean, we are not there to just serve the UN system. We are there also to work together with other organizations. So the question is not so much related to what footprint does UNDP have. The question is what footprint does the UN system have in general. And the question of development, I mean, development today is not about needs for development in, let's say, fragile circumstances or in least developed countries. I mean, you could basically say that almost all countries in the world today are facing development issues. And very often development issues which they cannot solve on their own. I mean, fighting climate change is something that all countries throughout the world are confronted with. All of us are. Tackling that is something no one can do on their own. They have to do together. An organization such as UNDP can be used to federate that effort and make sure that, that we work in a complementary way one with another.
You talk about fighting climate change. One of your first meetings in your new job, I believe, was with the SIDS group of countries, the small island developing states. How do you bridge the divide on the idea of climate? On one side, you have these countries that scientists say might be submerged under the ocean and not exist. And then you have the leader of the most powerful nation on earth saying it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, a hoax and a scam.
Look, I can, when in doubt, I would say trust science. And science is very clear on the fact that climate change is real, that it is provoked by, predominantly by human activity. But science also shows that it's perfectly feasible to reduce the emissions. It's not that today we're waiting for some miraculous solution falling out of the sky. I mean, all the pieces of the puzzle are on the table, and they're actually becoming more affordable than ever. And in some domains, we are lagging. I mean, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, approximately 2/3 of the Sustainable Development Goals are or stalled or in delay compared to the schedule. So we have to catch up on that. But in some domains, we're actually ahead of the curve. I talked about photovoltaic cells. Actually, they're cheaper than anyone would have imagined 10 years ago. The adoption of electric vehicles, of EVs, is actually going faster than expected. So there's domains where we overachieve, but unfortunately, there's today many domains where we are slower than we should be.
Do you worry about the fact that the UN has to walk on eggshells not to upset the Trump administration? You mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, they're all about collective global action. That's not America first, is it?
Well, look, the United Nations has the assignment to bring people around the table. And to bring people around the table who sometimes have different opinions. And you know, this is a free world. Who am I to judge on the opinions that the member states have? I will work together with the ones who believe that working together actually has an impact. There is today way more countries that believe in multilateralism than there are countries that are skeptical on multilateralism. The issue is that today the ones who are skeptical are very loud. The ones who believe in multilateralism are actually way too quiet. And so countries who believe that you're better off in working together, and there's a lot of these, well, they should rally together and they should try to achieve as much as possible. And I'll be open to work with any member state and to understand that in the world of today, many countries look at their self-interest. There's nothing wrong with looking at your self-interest. Not at all. I mean, the world has changed. The United Nations need to change as well. But our mandate is still the same. If I look at UNDP, my mandate is eradicating poverty, protecting people, and protecting planet. The world has changed. The mandate is still the same. The methods we should be using to achieve that mandate need to change together with a changing world.
In the next year, you are going to have a new boss. That's a certainty, because the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, his term ends at the end of 2026. Is there any excuse, in your view, as someone who was very close to the UN as a political leader, and now for a few days a UN insider, any excuse not to have the next woman, after 9 men in a row, the next SG to be a woman? And before you answer, I think it's worth telling the audience here, you wrote a book, The Age of Women, Why Feminism Also Liberates Men.
I can only recommend everyone that book. And thank you for the commercial here. Look, a few elements. First of all, the selection of the new Secretary General is a selection made by the member states.
Of course.
Not by the leader of UNDP or any other agencies. What is important is that at least let's start with making sure that the selection basis, let's look at like the candidates or people who put themselves forward as candidates, that list of candidates is not just a list of men. And I've seen that too often, even in national politics, when you say, you know, give me a short list of candidates, very often you would get a short list of, out of 10 candidates, you would get 9 men and only 1 woman. And so pushing for having a more broad list of candidates, I think is a first element. Then, you know, in national politics, before becoming prime minister, the prime minister before me was a female prime minister, and I served in that government with a female prime minister, and I can only recommend it for everyone. And UNDP was one of those organizations that already had female leadership with Helen Clark before that Achim Steiner took it over. So The selection is made by member states. Let's make sure that you have a broad basis out of which you can select.
The selection is made by member states, but really it's the P5 that decide, isn't it? And one of the P5 believes that DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, is a very bad thing. Trump has said it amounts to discrimination and discourages merit and leadership.
Well, I think the selection basis is excellence, experience, leadership, ambition. There is plenty of women in the world who have those qualities.
Thank you so much for joining us in your first interview here at the Doha Forum as the administrator of the UN Development Programme, Alexander de Croo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Administrator de Croo. Thank you, James. As always, you get scoops, first interviews, and so on. But I won't be jealous. Thank you both so much. Time now for a final break, a coffee break, to help us refuel, recharge, and get our last caffeine fix of the day before we embark on our last session of the forum and onto our closing ceremony.